There's something very wrong with the value proposition of higher education, but I don't actually feel like there's that many people who share that opinion. They feel like that's a minority opinion. That's something else that you might be surprised to learn. There's a lot more people out there than you might think who are very skeptical of higher education. That number of US adults who think that college education is very important has dropped by nearly 20%. Hello, and welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co host, David Rethemeyer.
And I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And this is an episode of Unbound Talks where Jonathan and I are going to sit down for a conversation, just the two of us. And today, you guys are in for an episode of the two of us talking about something that we are very passionate about, both because it is something that Unbound is passionate about. It is one of the main things that we are looking at addressing, one of the biggest problems that we look at addressing, and also because just straight up, it is something that both Jonathan and I are very passionate about as a really big problem, and we want to address it.
Yeah, we're wound up, so brace yourselves. I hope that you're ready because we're both kind of passionate about this subject. And that subject is what we consider to be one of the most pervasive and annoying myths in kind of society today, which is if you don't go to college, you're going to be, and I used to, David, insert all these terrible jobs. And then in the course of my speaking, I would always have somebody in the audience that did one of those terrible jobs. And they would come up to me and be like, actually, my job's pretty cool. Right. And so insert whatever terrible job, if you don't get a college education, you're going to be working at a fast food restaurant for the rest of your life. You're going to be digging ditches. You're going to be hauling
Mhm.
trash and whatever it is, whatever you think is a terrible job. The idea is that if you don't get a college degree, somehow you're doomed to just this second fiddle life where financially everything's hard, personally everything's hard, professionally everything's hard, and you don't have any options. And I don't know that that was ever really true, but it is less true now than it has been in a long
Mhm.
time. And in fact, there's some things that run exactly opposite. So both David and I are not only passionate about this, but we recently wrote some articles, which you can find, shameless plug, on the B. So go to beunbound.us and search for the blog and you'll find our articles there. But David, you had a really shocking statistic that you covered in your article and your research that we were discussing right before we went live here. And so it was about the earning power of a college degree. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that feels like to me always is one of the biggest factors that sticks out in everybody's mind is that, okay, yes, a college degree is typically expensive. Yes, you have to deal with some student loans, but a college degree sets you up to be able to earn a lot of good money. Well, I did a little bit of research on some statistics, and so this is some research from Statistia. So if you want, I have the research linked in my blog article. We will link both of the blog articles that we talk about in the show notes down below. So, according to that research, the average annual income of a college graduate in 1990 was $52,000, which is a pretty reasonable, like a pretty reasonable rate. And especially if you're thinking about the value of our currency,
In
1990,
1990. Yeah.
$52,000, pretty solid. Now that I say that, now I want you to, as you're hearing this, to consider inflation over the past several years. I want you to consider also the cost of college tuition. So the cost of college tuition has increased dramatically. This is not a new revelation, but the amount is pretty staggering. The college tuition cost average has increased from 1980 to 2022 180%. 180% increase in cost over 30 years. And most college graduates have to pay off student loans. It takes the average college graduate 20 years to pay off those student loans. Now, all of this, the traditional argument is okay, yes, there's student loans, but ultimately, like, I'm sure that you're going to actually be earning more. And so, surely, that the average college graduate now is earning more than it did in the past. So, listener, I want you to guess in your mind right now if in 1990 the average college graduate earned $52,000 a year, how much do you think that a college graduate earned on average in 2022? If your guess was somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 or even $80,000, that might be more reasonable, especially considering that inflation has been a huge factor. The average salary of a college graduate in 2022 also $52,000 a year. So it is
Just
exactly the same number.
yeah, just stop it. I just want people to absorb what David just said. I mean, I know David just said it, but I'm going to say it again for emphasis. The average starting salary for the average salary, excuse me, David, is it starting salary or salary?
Just average annual income of
And
of a college
average annual
graduate.
income has changed not at all from 1990 to 2022, despite the fact that everybody that has two brain cells rubbed together knows that that is not the case for college tuition. I just think that that is an absolutely breathtaking and astonishing thought. So,
Well, and not only that, but if you consider that the fact of inflation, the amount of value that you are losing out now, that is a 57.6% drop in value. That is how much less a college degree is getting you now, as far as the average that a college degree will earn you. And so if you compare the numbers, okay, the value of it has dropped 57.6%, but the cost has increased 180%. There's something really wrong here with the value proposition.
well, and I think that if you listen to this, there's all kinds of implications you can take from it. But one of the implications I want to draw from it first is that for those of you who are older and past this and are not going to college and you're just starting out your adult journey, just take a moment to absorb that and maybe extend a little bit of sympathy to Gen Z, who is coming into the workplace now, who is expected to pay 170% more for their college tuition, which means significant loan impairments and significant problems, all those things, to earn the same amount that you would have earned in 1990. I just that's a breathtaking problem there, right? I mean, that's just
Hmm.
and if there's Gen Z gets a lot of people complaining about, and every generation does, but oh, they don't work and they don't they don't blah blah blah. Okay, some of those things might have some basis in truth. On the other hand, let's just not miss the fact that they've got a pretty stiff economic headwind that they're working against here, and it's compounded by this older generational pressure to attend college.
Hmm.
And look, I'm not ascribing any kind of evil motive here. If you're an older, if you graduated in 1990 or in that general area, then you're not incorrect, right? I mean, you could go to college, you could do it without debt, or you could do it with $5,000 or $7,000 of debt. You could pay that off in less than 10 years. It wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And it did indeed open you to a whole new income bracket that allowed you to earn more money and have more options. That's not incorrect. The
Hmm.
problem is that you still think it's correct in the same way. And what David's statistic is pointing out here is that it's not correct in the same way, that it earns you the same amount of money, but it costs substantially more. And my research that I did for my article is somewhat similar to this. And
Hmm.
it's based on something that really fries me and has for many, many years, which is the argument goes like this. Yes, it costs money to get a college degree. And yes, you have to borrow money and you have to borrow more money. And people say, and college degrees went up. But then they lay out this number and it just is supposed to be a conversation stopper. And they say, but statistics say the US Department of Labor says that if you get a college degree, that degree will be worth 1.3 to 1.7 million dollars more over the life of your career. And people
Hmm.
go, "Oh, wow, 1 point." So let's just steel man this argument and let's just
Hmm.
say it's the top end. And it's like 1.7 million dollars. Well, the first thing is that I hate to say this, but 1.7 million dollars ain't what it was in 1990.
Hmm.
So that inflation thing is a big deal. And so, yeah,
57, 56.7% less to be
that's
precise.
right. And so that's a little bit of a sobering thought right there. But the part that really fries me about this is the way that this statistic is derived. When these statistics are derived, what happens is that you're talking about a macro data set here. And that data set includes the average salary of everybody who has a college degree versus the average salary of everybody who doesn't have a college degree across all jobs. Okay, so let's just point out a couple of inconsistency and problems. First of
Hmm.
all, people who have college degrees tend to be older. It's not adjusted for age, right? And
Hmm.
so people who are older make more money, period. And so you've got older people in the college degree section than you do in the other one. Secondly, this includes all jobs. So that includes entry level jobs that don't require college degrees. So all the fast food workers are in here, lifeguards are in here, any kind of any all those jobs that are those opening of stocking shelves at Walmart is in here. Working at Lowe's is in here. I mean, like all these kinds of entry level positions that it makes sense they wouldn't have a degree. Those are all included, and it's that pile that's stacked up against the pile of the degree.
Hmm.
Of course, there's going to be a gap here. Here's what I'd like to see. What if you took it and took the average salary of skilled labor, skilled tradesmen, and you did that and held it against it? And nobody's running that. And I'm not ascribing motive here, but my guess, and I couldn't find, I looked for some statistics here, but my guess is that you would find that the skilled tradesman is making far more. And then there's kind of this crazy little detail, which is the college graduate went into debt and lost 4+ years of earnings to be
Hmm.
able to get their salary. The skilled tradesperson got paid to get the same thing. So we're talking about a
Hmm.
significant swing there. And so it's just a statistic that people throw about all the time and say, oh, well, clearly a college degree is worth much more. And they're not really looking inside as to how those statistics are derived. And it's not a very fair comparison. My argument is not that one ought not to go to college. My argument is that one ought not to consider it to be a default position, and that to go to college should be looked at like anything else, which is there's a cost benefit analysis that has to happen here. And so if you're going to college to get a degree in mechanical engineering, first of all, that's the only place you can get that credential. And so that's makes college your only option. And secondly, the job outlooks for mechanical engineers pretty good. And so you can then afford, and some of this stuff works in terms of affording some debt and all those kinds of things. But what I see most often is people that don't know what they want to do with the rest of their life, and they
Hmm.
are told to go to college to figure it out. And I would say that that's an obscenely stupid way to find out what you want to do in life. It may have been a good idea when it only cost you $7,000. It's not a good idea when it might cost you $100,000 in debt. And
Hmm.
that just there's a shift in perspective there that's really important.
Well, and here's the other thing, Jonathan, is that I think it could have been a much better idea when information was not democratized like it is now. That's the thing, is that now your ability to go out and research a specific topic and to learn about basically any subject that you want and get a lot of really solid baseline information is vastly different now than it was in 1990. In 1990 and before, if you wanted to be able to have a higher, more nuanced understanding, if you wanted to hear from experts on a particular subject and become just a more well educated person with a higher amount of knowledge, college was a great way to do that. And so that allowed you to gain a lot of perspective that was not available in other places in society. Whereas now, information and access to expert level information is at your fingertips basically all of the time. And so now that value that you potentially had is completely lost.
Well, and that's an excellent point. And I've used an illustration in the article, and I want to kind of bring it out here because I think it's not that I'm suggesting this as the alternative strategy. It's just that I
Mhm.
want to. So don't hear this and say, "Hey, Jonathan says if you do it exactly this way, that everything will be turned out rosy." It could be that's the case. I'm not actually arguing that. I'm just arguing as a kind of a let's look at some things and think about how we could do this differently, and it might lead you to some surprising conclusions. So, one of the things that I've been telling people for a long time is that when you look at the cost of college, it's not just what you pay, it's also what you have to borrow. And then there's another big missing piece, and that is it's the lost earnings from the 4 years that you're not working. So, and you can go to the article to get some of these fine statistics. And like David, I will link the article below, and I link to all my sources, so you'll be able to see how this works. I'm
Mhm.
going to give you some rough numbers that actually may not precisely match what's in the article, just because I'm doing it off of memory here, but you can double check it there. But basically, I said, let's look at all these things. And the average cost for a college degree is hovering around $100,000. And I looked at probably 30 or 40 different websites and kind of took a rough average and all those things.
Mhm.
So, do you have $100,000 to pay for college right out of pocket? I just tell you that I don't talk to people in my social circles that typically do. So you're going to wind up having to borrow something like $50,000 to do that. And then you're going to have to, I think something like 5.2 or 5.4, something like that percent interest is what the typical rate is running. And so if you end up borrowing that, that's what you're going to have to borrow, and that's what you're going to have to pay. And so that makes the total cost of the degree about $116,000, something like that.
Mhm.
Okay, well, but there's another switch here. And that is that you lost the earnings from working 4 years.
Hmm.
So let's say you worked at a job that paid like $17 an hour. We just recently interviewed for the podcast Tim Fisher, and he talked about working a construction job, which I think probably pays considerably more than $17 an hour. But he worked it as a high school student in fact, he worked it before he had a GED. So it's not super difficult to find a job that pays $17 an hour. Well, if you are living at home and you're assuming that most of your expenses are covered and that you could bank a lot of that, then you're looking at a cost here of not just what you would spend for college, you're looking at what you didn't earn. And
Hmm.
that's about $100,000. And so you're looking at the real cost of college being about $216,000. So $216,000, all of a sudden people go, well, that's a lot of money. Like that's
Hmm.
a $216,000 again to get an engineering degree. It's still a lot of money, but maybe it makes sense. To go to college because you don't know what you want to do with your life, that's really a pretty ridiculous proposal. And so then I carried it a bit further and say, let's say that you take that money and you're living at home and you're spending half of it on expenses. You're driving back and forth to work, you're doing all those kinds of things, but you're living at home, so you don't have to pay rent and you don't have to pay as much food stuff and all those kinds of things. And let's say that you worked really hard because you had a success mindset, maybe like Tim, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, and you want to really make something of your life and have your horizons get bigger and all those kinds of things. So you're not just working because you don't know what else to do. You're working because you have a bigger goal in mind. And so you take that money aside and you invest it. And so now you're working, 40, 30, 40 hours a week. You're taking that earnings, you're taking half of that and you're investing it and you're putting it in a savings account. But let's do better than that. Let's say you're putting it in some sort of investment account. Well, when you take that and you add the average market return the last 30, 40 years, which ends up being about 10%, and you look forward, now we're talking about a situation where if you did that for 4 years, you stuck that money in an account and then you never touched it again and you never added to it again, at the end of your career, you're looking at a return that's between 2.6 and $3.4 million, which if you're keeping score at home is double the supposed, like almost double the supposed return you get
Hmm.
on the degree. Now, people, if you're listening to this, you're like, well, what about market this? What about, okay, just remember my argument. I'm not suggesting that this is the blueprint for how to make $3.6 million. I'm just saying that which would you rather bank on? That you're going to go to college and have no idea what you want to do. And then you're going to earn some random degree. And then that random degree is going to actually pay off to the tune of $1.7 million in the next 40 years. Is that a good bet compared to you work a job that pays $17 an hour for 4 years and you bank every half of every dollar that you earn and you put it in some sort of investment and it's money in the bank. It's not potential money that you're going to earn. It's money that you actually have. And then you just let that sit there as a savings account. Which do you think is is the lower risk in terms of having more money at the end of that? And I'm not making a prediction on exactly how much money you're going to have. I'm certainly not predict market returns. People sometimes say, well, 10% is too high. Sure. Okay, fine. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying which of those two things looks like a better bet that you're going to wind up with go to college, not knowing you want to do what you want to do. You're going to wind up with a degree that is so valuable, it's worth $1.7 million in the next 40 years. Or you're going to work for $17 an hour, bank half of it, put it in some sort of investment and see what it's worth at the end of 40 years. Now, the point here is that I want people to sort of stop and go, no, wait a second. I bet you that latter idea is the less risky one. And if you're willing to go that far with me, then I want you to take another step and say, all right, now what's the best way to really move into adulthood here? Is it a college degree? Could be. That may be a valid scenario for you. But there's a whole lot of other scenarios that might be way more valuable and make way more sense than your traditional now when the costs are crazy. The starting salary is the same. The average salary is the same as in 1990. And you're looking at taking on an enormous debt load. And so I'm looking for you to kind of have that stereotype popped or that kind of common idea popped and think about it in a different direction.
Well, and here's the thing, Jonathan, is that for the past several minutes, we have been presenting a lot of just like the hard evidence for this. But what is fascinating is that I think a lot of you who are listeners, who are probably in our target audience, most likely are on a similar page to us of recognizing that, hey, there's something very wrong with the value proposition of higher education, but I don't actually feel like there's that many people who share that opinion. They feel like that's a minority opinion. That's something else that you might be surprised to learn is not actually true. There's a lot more people out there than you might think who are very skeptical of higher education. There is a recent Gallup study that looked at what percentage of the population viewed college as very important, fairly important, or not too important between the years 2013 and 2019. And I want you to hear this is that in 2013, so this is not that long ago, this is 11 years ago now, the percentage of US adults who thought that college education was very important was 70%. And that's very important versus fairly important and not too important. So, a very, very large portion of the population thought a college education was very important. And I think for most of us, we would think, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks with how we just think society works. In 2019, that number has dropped to 51%. I want you to really think about this because that is over not that long of a time. That is just 6 years. That number of US adults who think that college education is very important has dropped by nearly 20%. And it gets even more interesting if you look at the age ranges in here. So for the 65 and up, the percentage drop is lower. So it drops for 65 and up from 67% down to 55. But where it gets really interesting is for 18 to 29-year-olds. So the target audience for college in 2013, it was actually higher than the average. 74% believed college education was very important. It has dropped to in 2019 to 41%. This is something that I think we really need to acknowledge is the fact that a lot of the established institutions that we have are still attempting to tout the value of a college degree, but the majority of our young people are now recognizing, wait a minute, this isn't actually nearly as valuable as we thought it would. Maybe they haven't gone through and done the value additions that we've just presented to you, but there a lot more people than you and I probably expect are recognizing the fact that a college education is not actually the recipe for success that it once was viewed as.
Well, David, the important thing to look at there is that that's 2019. That's pre-COVID. So
Very
there's a
true.
group called populist.org that I cite in my article, and you should go to, anybody listening to this should go to populist.org, that you can access the research there for free. And they say that when Americans are given 57 priorities for their children, enrolling in a college or university ranked 47th out of 57 priorities. However, they think all their neighbors rank it third. And that's really an interesting point here. So now there's some of you out there who are just screaming at us right now. And I want to kind of make a few exceptions here so you understand what we're saying. So a couple of things. Is college an important part of our society? Yes. Is earning a college degree an important credential? I would say in some cases, yes. And so I'm not suggesting that nobody ought to go to college. And in fact, I have strong opinions about where you should go to college. I'd like to make this, it's kind of controversial, but I want you to hang with me for a second. This argument, there are things that colleges can do that nothing else can do. But those things are a lot more narrow than the colleges are currently saying. So when we're talking about an environment of ideas and deep learning and critical thinking and all those things, I don't know that there's anything that is as good as that as college. And so if you've got a kid who's really academic and really a deep thinker and is the kind of deep thinker who's going to do that perhaps professionally as a judge or as a or in some sort of really deep learning capacity, a research scientist, those kinds of things. Yes, absolutely. College is the way to do that. And let me not just say that college is the way to do that. Let me endorse and say there's some absolutely phenomenal Christian colleges, some of which we work with, who I think are absolutely phenomenal at this. We are really blessed to work with colleges like Bryan College and Liberty University and Geneva College. And we just are really, really excited about the kinds of things that they do and the environments that they have. What I am saying, though, is that there's also a lot of things that colleges have taken on over the years for a variety of reasons that, frankly, they're not really good at, and that they're less necessary to do that now than before. And that's the kind of critical shift. So David's right. In 1990, if you wanted to get exposed to new ideas and some of the best thinkers, college might have been the only game in town. And that's why there were lots of colleges and they attracted lots of people. But that's not the case today. You have access to almost all the world's information at your fingertips, and you're listening to this podcast, and you can get on the on the internet and check all of our figures and facts and all those kinds of things. And so, for example, here's what I tell people a lot. There's a lot of colleges that offer marketing degrees. And in 1990, that was really important. You would go talk to an expert who had come through the marketing ranks, who had learned how marketing worked, who was now kind of doing a second career as a college professor and was teaching everything they had learned in the industry. That's really important stuff. Look, folks, that's totally and completely different in 2024.
Mhm.
So now what happens is the person who is working as your marketing professor, by the very fact that they're teaching as a marketing professor, has already had the industry pass them by. And I'm not in
Mhm.
any way belittling then. I'm just saying that if you went 7 years ago, you left the marketing industry and you went and became a tenured professor at a college, I don't care how smart you were. I don't care how great your career was. 7 years is 4 lifetimes in a marketing world right now. And so
Okay.
almost you've got some basic information, sure, but almost everything, all the fundamentals in marketing have just shifted, and they shift all the time. So let's think about it from, I know David and I hire marketing professionals. And so let's look at that and say, well, what's the better deal for me? I go out and hire somebody who has a degree in marketing, taught by a professor who used to do marketing a decade ago, and they come out learning all the kinds of things that were really hot a decade ago. Is that helpful to me? And I would say it's not just not helpful, it's profoundly unhelpful. I'm
Mhm.
going to have to spend a year teaching them things that are different from what they learned when they think they know a bunch of stuff. Or what's a better deal? I take some person who just graduated from high school, who cares and thinks about marketing, has some of the core skills, who's been messing around with Instagram, and messing around with different things, is a bit of a graphic designer who writes good copy, who tells good stories, who has a good eye for things like, has some natural talent. And I bring them into our company and I say, great, let me have you sit at David's feet and learn some of this stuff in real time. And instead of doing a research project on this and write a paper, why don't you run a small campaign for us? Why don't you design some Instagram ads for us? Why don't you run a few things on Google? Why don't you do these kinds of things? In other words, let's do real stuff. And in just a
Mhm.
couple of months, I can train you up and then turn you loose and have you be infinitely more valuable to me while I'm paying you to do some of these things. And that's a profound difference from the way things were not that long ago. And I don't say that to disparage anybody who's working as a marketing professor. I just say that to observe the reality of what is going on in the world today. And so, consequently, the knowledge economy that people like to talk about, people think that equates to having a degree. The knowledge economy today equates to people who have experience.
Mhm.
And the experience is something that you can gain a lot faster, more efficiently, and probably get paid to get if you immediately start doing that in a job. And lots and lots of places that does not require a degree. In some places, a degree is absolutely required. I tell people all the time, if you're going to be an engineer, if you're going to design a bridge, I'm going to drive my family across. If you're going to be a doctor, and there's a possibility you're going to saw top my head off and poke around to get a clot out, I want you in the best colleges possible with the best professors on site, 100%. I don't care how much money you had to borrow to do it. But if you're talking about getting a degree in marketing or getting a degree in business or getting a degree in some of these things, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying you ought to consider carefully what you have to pay for that and other ways you might be able to gain that experience that could be much more powerful and much more profitable. Go the
Well,
other
and
direction.
here's another factor, Jonathan, is the fact that that's a very good point that there are some fields where college is extremely beneficial and that should probably stay in the field of degrees. But I think the number of fields and the types of fields that are in that category are shrinking. So,
Absolutely.
a field that I like to use as an example is that I have several close friends of mine who work in the cybersecurity industry, which is a extremely technical field and is one of the fastest growing industries just in the marketplace today, full stop. And so you would think potentially that this is an area where absolutely you need to go to college and you need to learn a lot of really important fundamentals and have a lot of very advanced knowledge. When I have asked the opinion of my friends who are now starting to move into management positions where they are looking at candidates to hire in cybersecurity positions, the foremost thing that they're saying is if somebody is coming to us fresh out of college with a degree in cybersecurity, that's a red flag for us. Because most of the time, they are learning from fairly outdated information. And especially in the field of cybersecurity, this is a field that is changing constantly. What we would much rather see is you having taken certifications. So, if you happen to be familiar with the industry, they're saying, look, we don't care if you have a college degree, but can you pass the ECPPT? Can you pass the OSCP? Can you pass these certifications that are industry standards that practically test your ability to get around real world current defenses? Can you actually prove your skill right now rather than can you prove that you know a bunch of things and have taken a bunch of classes? There might be some value to that. They're not saying that if you have a degree in cybersecurity, that's useless, but that's not what employers, practically speaking, are actually looking for, not even in some very technical fields like cybersecurity.
I think that the big conclusion I want to draw here is that this idea that the next logical step and the most likely path to success is graduate from college and graduate from high school and go to college. It is probably was never true and is more of a myth today than it ever was. And so so the bad news is it's going to require you to do some deeper thinking, and you're going to have to think about some of the other options. The good news is that this is an amazing time to be alive, and there's all kinds of really exciting other options. And so you don't have to do it the way everybody did it before. And there's one other aspect here that I want to touch on, and I want to do this a little carefully because, again, generally it's this situation where people are like, are you saying, and I'm going to try to fill in some of those blanks and say, no, that's not what I'm saying. And so let's get a little bit more specific here. So here's what I mean by that is that so often what happens is that people think, okay, here's the way things go happen and it's going to be successful. I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get this really valuable degree, and I'm going to get this huge network from college, which is going to place me in a bunch of jobs. It's going to make my career awesome. And so that is true in a very rarefied set of colleges and universities. And if you're going to some of those, then yeah, you might be able to get that kind of network effect. But most colleges and universities, they don't operate that way. And so what happens instead is that you leave a community. You go to a false community. And what I mean by false community is you go to, or maybe false is too strong a word. You go to a transition community. You go live at college, which is temporary. You're not there very long. And then you graduate from that college, and then you are searching around, and maybe you move back home. Maybe you don't. Maybe you move someplace else. And you move someplace else because that's your job. And maybe you got to leave from college for there or something. And so now you're dislocated. You're in a place where you have to start from scratch, and you have to learn a bunch of people and do all those kinds of things. Now, can you be successful that way? 100% yes, you can. I mean, that's the way lots of people do it. Is there anything wrong with that? No, there's nothing morally wrong with that. There's all kinds of examples. There's all kinds of advantages to that. Sometimes it's very exciting and very beneficial to move out of your comfort zone and to see new horizons and new places. I'm not at all belittling that. But it does miss the advantages you're giving up. Let's rerun that scenario. Let's say you've lived in an area for 15 years of your life. Okay. So you haven't been there your whole life, but you've spent 15 years. Those are formative years, and your family is there, and you have connections, you know, neighbors, you work for people in the area, you know, people through your church and all those kinds of things, right? You've got a community. What happens if you stay embedded in that community and you're able to pick up some skills and you're able to get some work? All of a sudden, here's the reality. Almost all jobs come from relationships. And so when you go to college, what you're doing is you're making this trade. You're saying, I'm going to give up on all the relationships that I've spent 15 plus years building. I'm going to go start from scratch somewhere. And I'm going to assume that this degree, this credential is going to compensate for my lack of relationships. And that will then launch me into a new set of things where I'm going to start from scratch and build new relationships. I'm going to be able to trade on those going forward. Or you can make a different calculation, which is I'm going to bet that the relationships I already have are going to provide opportunities beyond what I can understand right now that will lead me to who knows where, and that would be way more beneficial and way more efficient and probably have a better chance of success than my gambling on borrowing a bunch of money to get a degree that has uncertain value in this new economy. I'm not saying that one is right and the other is wrong. I'm certainly not attaching any kind of moral weight to either of those. I'm merely stating that people often flippantly toss out the community advantages without thinking about it very seriously and understanding what kind of potential they're perhaps passing on there. And that potential is at this point, because of the way the economy has changed, can be greater than, the very uncertain possibilities of a degree.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is an excellent lead in into what we here at Unbound do to look to equip young adults with what they really truly need. And ultimately, when you think about if you are a parent listening to this who is looking for an option like college for their kid, but is realizing to one level or another that traditional higher education is really not the value proposition that it once was, then we would like to invite you to consider, well, what is it that a young adult needs after they have completed high school? What do you want to set them up to be able to do? And we would argue that what every young adult needs is to be trained to lead a thriving life. And so that is what our goal is here at Unbound, is to train young adults to thrive. And by that, what we do not mean is we do not mean that we are going to set them up to be rich or famous or powerful. Those are very much the world's standards, our popular culture's standards of what it means to be successful. What we would argue is that success is not measured in physical, monetary means. Success is measured, we believe, in our relationships, and that is in our relationship with our Creator, with our God, and our relationships with those that we have around us in our community and in our families. And so we have designed our higher education alternative, our post-high school training program, Ascend, to do just that. It is a program that is designed to train young adults to thrive by allowing them to be embedded in their local communities, like Jonathan just talked about with the advantages of those, while also gaining real world practical experience and skills right where they're at.
And I think as we just close this out, I would just say this, that first of all, what David said is the most important part. We're not interested in training people to be rich, famous, or powerful. We're interested in training them to thrive. But I would also state that, we've been talking with a lot of passion here. This is not without knowledge, and it's not without backing it up. And I can't prove this to you anymore by saying this. When we talk about, hey, there might be some better alternatives, there might be some different ways to do that, we do those things, and we're willing to back up what we say, and we're willing to back it up this way. You go to college, you spend a lot of money, you borrow a lot of money, and you come out with an uncertainty as to what it looks like. You do something like Ascend that David just talked about. You spend 3 years with us. You earn our certificates. At the other end of that, you have a certificate granted from us. You might also have 90 credits of college credit that can transfer into our partner schools. You have specific skills in writing or in arts production or in video, in art or in video production. There's some specialized tracks that we offer. But at the end of the 3 years, you have a certificate from us. You've earned that certificate. Then we make this promise to you in writing. You will have a degree that pays more than the average starting salary for a college graduate in your area. You will get a job that pays more than the average starting salary of a college graduate in your area, or we will refund all 3 years of your tuition. And I say that because if you're thinking that the way we used to do this is how we did it, and this new way sounds risky, I understand that. And we're saying that we have been around long enough. We have seen this trend long enough. We have worked with students in this area long enough. We have enough alumni. We have enough successful students that we're willing to convince you of this by shouldering some of the risk for you and saying, look, if you're a little bit worried about this, we are flat guaranteeing that this works better. And I will tell you that we have yet to issue a refund. That, in other words, I don't consider this to be a high risk proposition. I consider this to be a very logical proposition to make because of the skills that you would pick up in a program like Ascend, and because of the network of students that we can put you in, and because of the ability of our students to deliver value in the marketplace. And if nothing else, I'd like you to enroll in Ascend. But more than that, I want you to just stop thinking you have to do it the way you've always done it before. Pause and make a decision. Is this the best choice for the options for the outcome that I want? And it could be it is, but I would say there's a fairly high percentage chance that it's not. And there's a new, different, better, more satisfying way to become a fully independent adult and step into this exciting new world and see where it leads.
I think that is an excellent conclusion. And like we've mentioned, the VSM program is something that we are very confident in. And so if you want to learn more about exactly how it works, you can visit our website. It will be linked in the show notes down below, and you can learn more information. And we would love it if you scheduled a call with us, and we would be more than happy to connect you with some of our team to be able to talk you through exactly what it looks like and answer any of your specific questions. So make sure that you visit our website. That is beunbound.us, beunbound.us. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Be Unbound podcast. And until next time, be unbound.